Supergirl is the second and latest film in James Gunn's new DCU universe, following 2025's Superman. It was directed by Craig Gillespie and written by Anna Nogueira. I enjoyed Superman quite a bit. I didn't love it as much as some other people did, but I do think it was one of the better superhero films in recent memory. Excluding stuff that takes place outside of the mainline Marvel or DC universes, like the Batman and the Spider-Verse films, it felt like a massive step in the right direction for superhero movies, remembering that these movies should be fun and colorful and vibrant, and not just desperately trying to keep you entertained by cracking constant jokes and being afraid to go too long without an action sequence. Unfortunately, Supergirl feels like a step down in almost every conceivable way. It feels much more like a corporate product. Superman, of course, was to an extent, but it at least felt like James Gunn had a true vision for that film and was able to see it through. There's none of that here for Supergirl. I don't see that anyone has left much of a creative mark on this film. This is much more in line with the DCEU before the reboot and with what Marvel has been putting out. Like always, I do want to talk about some of what I liked about Supergirl first. I think Millie Alcock does a pretty good job in the titular role, and she was easily one of the best parts about the movie. She's clearly having a ton of fun, bringing a good amount of energy and charisma. I think her performance does a good job at hiding some of the more awkward dialogue here, and she's especially impressive when you consider the honestly pretty bad screenplay that she was given to work with. I think it's completely absurd, some of the hate that she's received online for this movie, which goes all the way back to even when she was first casted, but I do think a lot of this hate is coming from a specific corner of the internet that I think, quite frankly, should just not be taken seriously. Without her, I think this movie could potentially have dropped an entire half star for me. Another good thing about Supergirl is its use of practical effects. There's a lot of aliens throughout this movie, and a lot of them were created without CGI, or were at least only enhanced by CGI and not totally created by it. I believe there was also a number of physical sets built for the film. So just in general, it seems that Supergirl relied much less on CGI than superhero movies usually do. Obviously, there still is a lot of CGI here, but it's very refreshing to see a superhero movie only use it when necessary. I think in some ways, Supergirl does also, at least somewhat, keep some of the fun spirit that Superman had alive. Again, a lot of this is probably just due to Millie Alcock. I would say too, even though a lot of the comedy here I don't think really works too well. I think there was probably only like 1 or 2 times that someone in my theater laughed, and even then it was like maybe just one person. But it at least isn't totally insufferable in how often it feels the need to make a joke. The movie I will always go back to as the absolute worst example of this is Thor: Love and Thunder, which feels like it's telling a joke every 10 seconds that goes by, and I kind of despise that movie because of it. So Supergirl does at least feel like it's trying to strike somewhat of a balance, but I also don't think it's as effective as Superman. And this is kind of where my praise ends already. To continue talking about the visuals, besides these practical effects, this is often a pretty ugly movie to look at. It's totally lacking the vibrant colors of Superman that help that one feel like a lot of fun. This movie is almost entirely dull and muted, to the point that it feels like they were afraid to use colors. The big climactic fight of this movie takes place on a planet that's basically entirely gray, and there's a large spaceship that's also gray, and characters are also wearing gray clothing. It's honestly just totally baffling to me how nobody throughout the production process thought to add some color here. It's so completely bland and unappealing. It makes this entire sequence kind of exhausting. And while I think this is maybe the worst example of it, a lot of the rest of the movie is like this too. So many of the locations throughout this look the same and feature the same color palette. I will just never understand why so many superhero movies choose to be dark and muted rather than bright and colorful. Sure, there are examples of superhero movies that are not bright and colorful and look fantastic, like The Batman, for example, but the difference is that's a film that, number one, still has excellent color grading, because of course, just because a film isn't necessarily vibrant doesn't mean it can't be amazingly graded, and number two, it fits the dark tone of that movie. There is nothing in Supergirl to justify it being so muted, and it's not even graded well regardless. It's not a creative choice, it just seems to be a total lack of wanting to do anything visually interesting. Like, I hate to say it, but this movie genuinely has atrocious color grading. And again, when looking back at Superman, this is even more puzzling to me, because I think that that was a movie that remembered fun superhero movies should be bright and colorful. I think one of the best examples of this is the conversation that Clark and Lois have by his apartment window, where there's a random fight happening outside that really pops with color. It's a great example of Superman just totally committing itself to being a really fun movie, but it also adds so much visual interest to the scene. There's nothing like that in Supergirl. The characters also feel incredibly lacking here. I think Supergirl herself is the best one, of course in part due to her having the most screen time, and again due to Millie Alcock giving a solid performance, but that's honestly where the list of at least semi-interesting characters ends. Ruthie, the child that serves as a major supporting character throughout the film, has next to nothing interesting about her. Literally the only characterization she has throughout the entire movie is that she wants revenge on the man who killed her parents. That's it. The entire movie, it feels like she's just constantly repeating that she wants to do this because there's just nothing else there. She's like the definition of a cardboard cutout character, and I was begging for this movie to do something more with her that would get me to care even just a little bit. It also doesn't help that her parents probably have a total combined screen time of like 1 minute at the beginning of the movie, so it's not like there's anything with them to make me care. I think even if her character stayed largely the same, if there was at least more given to me to make me care about her parents, that emotional connection I felt to her might have at least been a little bit stronger. But I think the only thing we even learn about them at all is that her dad is like a famous sword maker. I do also want to emphasize that Eve Ridley, who plays Ruthie, is fine in her role. It's a child performance, so you can't really expect too much, and it's not at all her fault that Ruthie is such an uninteresting character. It's just quite unfortunate that she was given so little to work with. The main villain of the film, Krem, who is also the character that Ruthie wants revenge against, is also super boring. He is given hardly any characterization at all, and like Ruthie, is kind of the definition of a cardboard cutout character. I see no reason why he couldn't be swapped with like any other generic comic book villain. I don't think he's all that threatening despite killing people or at least gravely injuring them on screen a number of times. The movie also just feels a bit all over the place sometimes, really lacking any kind of cohesion. It often feels like it's doing the film equivalent of this happened and then that happened. There's plot reasons given for stuff progressing how it does, but it often just feels unnatural and forced. Like the film was written for these action scenes, not that the action scenes were written for the film. It does also just feel way too action heavy sometimes. And while it does occasionally have quieter moments, I don't think it strikes an effective balance. The movie's actual story sometimes feels secondary to these action sequences. This movie also honestly feels like it's borrowing a number of ideas from Guardians of the Galaxy, which is not inherently a bad thing, but it just feels kind of weird. Of course, Supergirl isn't directed by James Gunn, but with him being the head of the DCU, he obviously would have a certain amount of influence over this film. Obviously, it being set in space is just something that this story needs, so on that front, I can't say that there's any similarities, but I do think Supergirl goes on a fairly similar character journey to what Star-Lord does, going from a person who kind of just doesn't care about all too much, has a troubled past because of their parents, but throughout the course of the movie finds people to care about and sort of rediscovers some kind of purpose in life. Of course, there's the whole music thing too, which is a broad enough thing that I feel like I can't say that's an idea taken from Guardians, but it does add to my feeling of the two films feeling weirdly similar. It also doesn't help that the needle drops in this movie are just not even remotely as good. Music is of course an integral part of who Star-Lord is in Guardians of the Galaxy, and here it just feels like Supergirl listens to music only so that the movie can use a lot of music. It doesn't feel like it's a significant part of her personality, when really it probably should have been. There's also one scene in this film that is almost just a recreation of another scene in Guardians of the Galaxy, which I think for anyone that has seen both movies will know what I'm talking about. And I know Supergirl is adapted from an already existing storyline in the comics, so a lot of these elements might already be present there, but regardless, I couldn't help but compare the two films. I don't think Supergirl is completely terrible. I had a decent enough time watching this movie in a theater, and I think some people can have fun with this if you just shut your brain off. But the more I think about it, and especially as I was writing this review, it does just feel like a mess. It also feels so much longer than an hour and 50 minutes. It does not feel like it effectively uses that runtime at all. I really hope this ends up being an outlier for the DCU, because again, I did like Superman, and I don't want to completely write off the DCU because of one movie. But if Clayface isn't around the same quality as Superman, it's gonna start looking like Superman is the outlier and not Supergirl. For me, Supergirl is a 2 out of 5. If you'd like more film reviews like this one, I would love for you to subscribe and leave a like on this video, but any amount of support is appreciated. Thanks so much for watching The Final Take, and have a good day.